We are in East Providence this morning, and last week we got a lot of our deck framing done. And I want to talk about some of the details that we have here because a lot of this stuff we were talking about kind of preemptively. We have our main deck brackets. You guys have asked a bunch of questions about these, so let's address those first. We cut out the plywood and set the LVLs back on the structure behind due to, number one, the distance that we wanted that bracket out, but also due to the structural detailing that we have. We wanted these things bolted directly to it, and then Julia actually came back and used the liquid flash around these brackets. A lot of you guys asked the question, well, why liquid flash over tape? Isn't liquid flash faster? You know, Julia's been great on a lot of these comments on YouTube and has addressed a lot of that, but we had this stuff mixed up for the door flashing above, so it just made sense from a timing perspective. This was kind of an afterthought. It was a detail that we kind of worked out in the field, so this is where we ended up with. First and foremost, we get the aluminum brackets bolted onto the wall, and then we have our ledger bolted to it as well. Before we put the ledger up, we actually taped the face of these brackets just to have some separation between the pressure treated and the bracket. And just to remind you guys, we're gonna have two layers of exterior insulation on this wall that will tuck up behind. So one of the reasons for these brackets is to keep the ledger away, but also have our continuous insulation run all the way up. And then we'll also have another layer of sheathing, and then our siding will tuck behind that ledger. And then on top, from the top here, we'll actually have a piece of flashing bent that will go from the first layer of the sheathing up and over the ledger to prevent any water from getting behind it. Beyond that, the deck framing is pretty standard, pretty typical. You have your double ledger on the wall bolted to the brackets. We have our floor joist coming over, and then we have our galvanized posts. Another great comment we got on YouTube was actually about these galvanized posts, and a gentleman who has installed, I think they were cell towers or something like that. He was talking about when they're at the base, we should protect these. So we're actually looking into a couple different products, and before we grade this and have grass run up against it, we're gonna coat the bottom of these posts just so that when they're buried, they're protected for the longevity of this. Even though they're galvanized, we wanna protect them. Saddles on these, this one obviously doesn't have the nuts on here. I think they pulled them off because they're gonna wanna put lock washers on them. But you can see pressure treated is notorious for being, you know, kind of all over the place with height. A lot of this stuff varied over 1/4 inch, so they set their height and notched the bottom of the outside ledger accordingly. All of that's gonna be buried. You'll have a nice piece of cedar on the outside covering it, so you won't see that. But over here, I like this detail where we have a joist that intercepts right where the post was gonna be, rather than trying to lay out the post where the joists are. The guys added a block, bolted that block right to the saddle, and was able to put a joist hanger right on that top of that block, so you're not having to adjust. You're getting your continuous 16-inch spacing. So when you're up top installing the deck, if we had exposed fasteners, all of your fasteners are going to be equally spaced. So working our way around here, we actually have the deck that wraps back towards what will be a future breezeway. We have our cast in place metal deck up there. What that's going to do is that's going to get insulation as well as cover board and a rubber membrane, or an EPDM roof essentially, in between the house and the future garage. We have to frame the garage first. Once that is done, we'll be waterproof. This deck framing will continue across, and then we'll actually install sleepers on top of that EPDM, and our deck will actually start at the beginning of the breezeway and then frame the view. So why don't we go up top? You'll kind of start to see what it's framing as a view through that breezeway, and you can see some of this deck framing up there as well. So standing here, this will be the future breezeway, and you're going to have, like I said, you're going to have your insulation, your cover board, and then your EPDM that will be wrapped up this wall, very similar to how the Stego is here, across, and will wrap up the wall on the garage. Right now, that step, it appears as though it should have one additional step, but that deck framing will come all the way across and be at an elevation here, which will be one step into the house. Like I said, they're leaving this framing off temporarily while we get all of this waterproofing in, and then they'll get that framing coming all the way across here. So this deck will be an Ipe material, so a natural wood material to go along with our natural cedar siding. Let's go inside. We actually Julia actually installed a door to get out there so we can kind of take a look at what this deck looks like from our first floor here. And oddly enough, well, I guess not oddly enough, but it makes the house feel a lot bigger now that we have all this additional square footage. So we have our temporary wall here set up so we can get our glass door installed. Again, our Proseco liquid flash here. Then you see that deck. We're actually working with View Rail, and View Rail is going to be fabricating a stainless steel handrail for us all the way around this deck. So we considered using cable rail, but here it will be a stainless post with a solid stainless rail horizontally spaced across this entire length of the deck and returning back into the deck. But the biggest update, this deck is framed. We got material coming here for our garage. We also have Duragutter who just showed up. They're delivering our gutter product because we have some exterior carpentry details that we want to work through with having the stock on site. It's actually an extruded aluminum product. We've talked about previous episodes about how our downspouts are buried, very well detailed. So that stuff is on site. He also has this interior trim that he wanted to share with us. It's an interesting concept where essentially you have a plastic clip that gets installed during paint, and at the very end you have this small, really minimal piece of aluminum that snaps on, you know, giving you a really minimal look on the inside. Not something that we're going to be using on this project, but cool to see nonetheless. This is a Z-GIRT material. Talked about how we have 2 layers of sheathing on this project. So this right here is what is going to space from the first layer of sheathing to the second layer of sheathing while capturing the insulation in between, rather than adding additional wood blocking. Or, you know, something that we talked about early on is installing our, we got one piece here, but we're talking about installing our insulation and then having 2 layers of that and having our plywood and then screwing through 2 layers of insulation and hitting that stud. One of the concerns was that we'd have a single layer, a second layer, and then our plywood, right? Make this look pretty, right? And it would be 1/2-inch plywood on the outside of this, but with that being said, now taking a screw, right? My invisible screw gun, and driving a screw through this all the way back into our stud in the wall. The stud's only 1.5 inches wide, so there's a lot of, you know, that screw can kind of vary left and right, and if we don't hit that stud dead on, we really don't get the pull-out strength that we want. So Julia came up with and actually found this product. Get that over there. The Z-GIRT system. So, you know, now you can see kind of what that's doing. Now you could do this continuously, but you don't need to. We figured out how far these needed to be spaced apart, how many screws we needed into our stud, our structure, and then how many screws we needed on our outside layer of plywood into this system, all while capturing this insulation within this, you know, Z shape. So we'll do this on the wall in clips, and then up on the roof we'll do this in a continuous fashion. And now, being that it's fiberglass, you get that reduced thermal bridging. And you're also not worrying about running a huge screw from all the way on that outside layer into a stud. Now you're just dealing with screwing from here through a 1/2-inch layer into our stud, and the same thing on the outside here. Really great solution. A little bit abnormal to see in residential, typically a product that you might see in commercial, but a great use for this particular application. So we'll be getting to this install here in a few weeks, but we wanted to get this on site to walk through the gutter detail. And the guys from AGS HVAC just showed up. They're getting equipment in, and Julia took the time to lay out the entire home in 3D. All the ductwork is laid out, all the mechanical equipment is laid out, and this was done pre-framing to make sure that we had the space for it. So in next week's episode, you're going to start seeing some of the mechanical go in, and the benefit of doing this ahead of time, and how much rework we can prevent. So guys, appreciate you sticking around. Stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you then.